Heavyweights battling out in style. Coming up this weekend from Salt Lake City, we have Derrick Lewis, the Black Beast, looking to capitalize on his first win since he bounced back off the interim title shot at UFC 265 in beating Chris Daukaus in a main event. That was back in 2021. Lewis this weekend taking on a surging Pezao, Marcos Rogerio de Lima, who today I decided, you know what? I'm going to seek out some of that weird Pezao tape. Because listen, this was a guy that we know. He's the Priscila Cachoeira of light heavyweight. Really struggled at making 205, so he had to bounce up to 265, only to become one thick, juicy boy at heavyweight. And again, I know that Rogerio de Lima's on a run. But go back to a time when Rogerio de Lima was 7-0, fighting 21-1 Paulo Filho. You can find that clip on YouTube. It's terrible. But you see a lot of ground and pound from Rogerio de Lima. You see a lot of celebrating and so on and so forth. But when you look at a fight like this, for Derrick Lewis, he's lost in consecutive fights. He got finished by Tai Tuivasa, Sergey Spivak, and Sergey Pavlovich. Now that'll happen. Those guys are all ranked in the top of this division. But if you look at it for Lewis, 10 UFC main events, 5 co-main event slots. This guy has had 15 big spots in 26 UFC fights. This is the 5th. And he's only fought on 5 prelim fights so far in his UFC career. This is his first prelim spot since 2016, when Derrick Lewis beat Damian Grabowski by TKO in the first round. It does not happen very often.
Is Derrick Lewis like Cincinnati Reds Ken Griffey Jr.?
He's
Is
a
that
little
an
bit
okay
like
call? Because for Lewis, you're right. Like in his prime, he was not only one of the better heavyweights, but one of the most famous too. And we're going to talk about that a lot more in the main event because, you know, the lightweight division is not only a division with a lot of good fighters, it has a lot of big star names as well. And for Derrick Lewis, he did a great job marketing himself outside the cage, which not enough people do whatsoever.
Hasn't had an Instagram in like a year now.
Which is wild, because that was the thing that really got people on board with Derrick Lewis. They saw that side of him, they saw the humor, and they thought, okay, not only can he knock people dead, he's kind of a funny guy outside of the cage. But for Lewis,
he can cut weight. Oh, guys, can he ever cut weight?
The thing about Derrick Lewis, though, it's really interesting because his whole life he has fought like you think a heavyweight fights. It's, hey, I'm going to just get up when I get taken down, even though he doesn't use a lot of technique. And all you guys know what I mean when I say Derrick Lewis just gets up. You can have his back with both hooks in sometimes, and Derrick Lewis decides, nah, I'm done with this. Gets back up to his feet, does everything wrong, but somehow has the physical strength to get out of those sticky situations, and then he can find success in the feet. The fight that I watched a couple of times in preparation for this was the Marcin Tybura fight, oddly enough. And you want to know why?
Because he finishes him early?
No, he finishes him late after he gets beat in the first 2 rounds. But for Lewis, he doesn't do a good job accepting pressure. And I do think with Lewis and his game plan, it really comes down to being one note. When he's moving forward, when he is the hammer, let's just be honest, there's not a lot of heavyweights that can withstand Derrick Lewis. If he hits you with big power shots, the fight's pretty much over. Tai Tuivasa was able to eat a couple of them, but for the most part, Lewis has been able to just maintain that power. The question that I have is, at 38, are we starting to see that decline? And not even at 38, has the decline already begun? And are we starting to ask ourselves, how much does Derrick Lewis have left? Because if Lewis was that top 10, top 5 version of himself, I genuinely don't think this fight is very close. I think he can close the distance very rapidly. We all know the odd athleticism Derrick Lewis has. He looks like a big guy, but he can close that distance very fast. And against a guy like De Lima, who's known for throwing those big wide shots, he's got the great leg kick as well. I just don't know if De Lima's speed can match Derrick Lewis. I know that's a wild thing to say because you bring it up. De Lima's a former 205er. He fought at 210 like 3 times, so I always want to call him a 210er. But for De Lima, I still don't think speed is something that followed him up into the heavyweight division. I always assume when someone goes from 205 to heavyweight, they're going to have that big speed advantage like we have seen some guys. But De Lima bulking up hasn't been a recipient of that.
How many times do you think in the crowd last week, UFC London, you got Aspinall taking on Tybura, how many times do you think some British guy said, I'm going to butcher it, but said, that's a 210er, isn't it? They're just offering up money. 210er,
Hopefully not. But you get my point.
Yeah,
De Lima's not a guy who moved from 205 to heavyweight and then just became this crazy good athlete. Like, if you fought Jalton Almeida, you would really see a big difference in their levels of athleticism. But De Lima's done a really good job at becoming more of himself when he moved up in weight, because that would just accentuates his power.
And you knew De Lima as a kickboxing champ coming into MMA. He was not just a Sao Paulo, but a Brazilian, but a South American, but a Panamanian, or Pan-American, not Panamanian. He didn't go to Panama for it. Maybe he did, but a Pan-American champ. All that in kickboxing. You see that with Rogerio de Lima. Now, the thing that scares me is Rogerio's fought all different shapes and sizes of men, and he's won the majority of these fights. Stefan Struve was a co-main event to a Jan Blachowicz card where he got submitted by Stefan Struve. And Derrick Lewis, you talk about it, the just comeback fights against Tybura, against Volkov, he's able to get it done. You look at Rogerio de Lima, and I went back and I watched this fight against a fellow thicker boy, Alexander Romanov. What happens in that one? Forearm choke, and that's a submission, and you rarely see that.
So meathead.
But if you watch it, until Romanov gets the takedown, Rogerio, hands down by his waist, landing those leg kicks, and that's a big thing for De Lima. He lands those leg kicks, and you have to either switch stance or back off, and then the boxing opens up for De Lima. You look at the fight that De Lima had against Ben Rothwell. March forward, bull rush him, I think is the proper way to say that, and Rogerio de Lima gets the win in that one. For De Lima, 6-5 from 2014 until the end of 2020. But from 2021 on, he's 4-1 with that only loss going to Alexander Romanov. And you look at his last time out, it was the worst fight against Blagoy Ivanov. Happy trails, sweet prince. Rogerio somehow wins that one. People were split on the MMA decisions on that one, but it was a close fight. There were 6 that had it for De Lima, 7 that had it for Ivanov. But if you go and you look at this one, De Lima training with those big guys at American Top Team, a lot of big heavyweights there. I'm sure Marcelo Golm got a few rounds in that one. For Derrick Lewis, I assume he's still training in Houston, 4-ounce Fight Club, Main Street Boxing and Muay Thai, Crew Bob Perez there. But if you look at it for Lewis, no social medias, no Instagrams anymore. He broke the mold there. So if you do look at a fight like this, De Lima is slightly favored in the fight. I'd say it's probably going to be pick 'em by the end of it. So we have a look at Topology to see what the fans are thinking this one.
How are these men the same age? That's what to me, De Lima's been 38 for 38 years, and Derrick Lewis, we have kind of seen the natural progression of his career. I gotta be De Lima, I thought was old when he fought at 205. That's all. It's just surprising for me to see these guys kind of meet in the middle, because De Lima was on the outside of that top 15 for so long, and when he was fighting those upper echelon guys, I thought Struve was going to be the win that really catapulted him, at least into fighting more consistent top 15 opposition, and he did drop him early in the fight, but we saw when De Lima is forced on his back to really grapple for elongated positions, he does struggle quite heavily. Not saying we're going to see that a lot in the Derrick Lewis matchup, but we have seen Derrick Lewis shoot for double legs in the past. He doesn't get a lot of them, but he does shoot for that technique, and I'll be curious to see if we do see some wrestling out of Lewis in this matchup.
And you'll see low hands, head kick. Will it be there for Lewis? The fan vote, surprised us it is to you. I'm going to say over under 65% for Pezao de Lima in this one.
I think it'll be under because Derrick Lewis is such a big fan favorite.
And it is the opposite. You're right. 1,208 total votes. 60% Lewis, 91% by knockout for the 40% that have Rogerio de Lima, 58% by knockout, and there's 21% by submission. I'm going Rogerio de Lima in the matchup. I wasn't sold when he fought Ben Rothwell going into the fight that he would do something like that, and sure enough, he did. The first knockout loss that Rothwell had since Cain Velasquez. But if you look at it for Rogerio de Lima, combination of hand speed, the fact that if he does march forward, if he does throw the leg kicks, he can have a lot of success. I think his last fight, a little bit of an anomaly because it was just the slowing down of the watch against Blagoy Ivanov, but I do have Rogerio de Lima in the matchup.
I have Derrick Lewis, and I'm going to bring up a point I'll bring up in a little bit. I don't think Rogerio de Lima would have beat any of the guys Derrick Lewis lost to, because all those guys are genuinely quite talented fighters at this point.
You have the number 1 guy, the number 6 guy, and the number 8 guy. Those are all the guys that Lewis lost to.
Derrick Lewis has only gotten ready to fight guys in the top 15 for 6 straight years. Every time Derrick Lewis fights somebody, they're arguably the best heavyweight in the division, and I do think that helps you over time. Now, if Lewis is a shell of himself, if he just doesn't have much left, if this is kind of a swan song, if you will, then yes, I could see De Lima landing a lot of those leg kicks, making Derrick Lewis fight in more of a defensive manner, because when Lewis is backed up, he is not nearly the guy he is when he's moving forward. Even go back to the Travis Brown fight, you can see that. But I still think Lewis is going to be able to counter off of one of those leg kicks and land a big shot.
We'll see how this one goes. Split on the pick. I'm going with Brazil's De Lima. Matt going with the Black Bees, Derrick Lewis. Some big-time fights on this card. Chiesa is taking on Holland. You're not going to want to miss it. Keep it locked in with Fight Night Picks, we always say.
Let's get into it.